Uh, there's a point at which you know what you've designed has failed. Stopped working. Done. The minute you start spending more time on disciplining the behavior of the students than you do actually teaching, you've failed. I have an example of that. It was first few years I was in the classroom, and 17 years ago, there wasn't much in the way of educational technology. I think the best you could hope for was an in-class VHS player. If you had a computer, you were lucky, and maybe a I don't know tape or CD player or something along those lines. Well, I had at the time what was considered to be a cutting-edge classroom, and they had put a 35-inch television up on the wall, and they held it with this huge bracket, and it was like leveraged like a cantilever because this thing weighed ungodly amount of weight. The tube televisions were hundreds of pounds, or at least 100 pounds or something. It was heavy, and so it hung there in the corner of the classroom. And the only way to get a signal to it was to use an RCA jack, or like those jacks that you put in the back of the VHS cassette recorders, but it was the yellow one. So we had a little thing in the back of the computer that would send a signal out and to the television through the RCA jack. The problem is that the resolution was horrendous. It was horrible. So anything below, let's say, 50-point fonts could not be seen at the back of the room. Well, at the time, the curricular goal was to teach the solar system. And the solar system, we're talking name and order of the planets, specific weight data, size data, statistical stuff about them, orbital lengths, general masses, and maybe some pictures, identify it visually. And then, just for kicks and giggles, I threw in the names of the satellites that had taken the pictures. Now, to try to attempt to make this more fun, I thought, hey, let's do this. Let's have them make a board game. And in the process of making the board game, they'll go through the lecture part here where I'm going to talk to them about all the stuff in the planets. I'm a moderately interesting person to listen to, so I thought, hey, I got this, no problem. And so I started in on it. And so we start at the beginning in Mercury. So I start getting into Mercury, and I load the what was PowerPoint, whatever version it was, and it opens up. It's got a picture, colored background. Nothing fancy. And so I start going through it. Now, the first planet, Mercury, it went through pretty well because none of the other teachers really used this technology. So initially, the kids were like, ooh, modern conveniences. It's on the TV instead of an overhead. And it was in color. And it was a big deal. But because they hadn't seen it before, it was attention grabbing. So I showed some pictures. They were pretty onto it for the first day. The next day, I think we got through probably Mercury, halfway through Venus, and then the next day it was Venus, and then through Earth. Now, as we were getting through the second day, now that they'd seen it, there's nothing new. And that's where it started to fall apart. Because by the end of the second day, I realized I was in trouble. Because I had to start calming people down, quieting them down, trying to get them to not pay attention to the person next to them. The notes were starting to get sloppy. Things were falling apart, and I had 7 more planets to go through. So I had no other way to get it to them. So I just kept going, and I had to then talk in accents. I think I did an entire day as Dr. Evil once. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, welcome to the solar system. This is the big fat one, Jupiter. Yeah, it's got lots of moons. I was pulling everything I could think of out of my hat. And by Friday, by the time it was actually time to actually build the game, only a handful of kids had paid attention long enough to actually build the questions of the game. They struggled with the idea of what the game was supposed to do. And they were so burnt out by the time they got to the end that none of them, I should say most of them, struggled to stay engaged. And this was at the beginning of the school year. It's like the first 6 weeks of the school year is the space unit. And it's difficult to say that it went well because I don't think it did. Maybe a couple classes did it, but for the most part, it was horrible. So what happened? I had a curricular goal. I had a target. I had planned out the information in a logical order. I had done, in essence, a lot of the things that they talk about in the book. All of the design phases, I kind of went through them all. There was a wild card factor here that the book doesn't talk about, and that's why this failed. Now, years later, while I was hanging out with my brother's a graphics artist, or he used to be a graphics artist for Sony Online, and we came up with an idea. And this idea radically changed how this whole thing went down. And I'll explain more about that a little later, if you're lucky and if I remember.